Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting into a future that hovers somewhere between dream and inevitability. A tomorrow where the line between ocean and sky blurs into something altogether new. You're about to spend one full rotation of Earth aboard Cascade Station, a floating city suspended above the Pacific, where the morning mist rolls beneath your bedroom window and dinner conversations happen while dolphins breach in the depths below. Fair warning, you probably won't look at solid ground the same way after this. The engineering alone might make your head spin, and we haven't even gotten to the part about growing lettuce in seawater or catching the sunrise from a platform that gently sways with 20,000-ton rhythms. So before we cast off, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy these journeys through time and possibility. While you're at it, drop your city and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see who's tuning in from Auckland at breakfast or Amsterdam past midnight. Now settle in, maybe grab something warm to drink, and let's ease into tonight's voyage together across the waves of what might be. The first hint of dawn arrives not as light, but as motion. Your sleeping platform registers the shift in wave patterns 4 kilometers below, adjusting its hydraulic stabilizers with the kind of precision that keeps your coffee from rippling. You stir on a bed that floats within a room that floats within a district that floats. Layers upon layers of engineered buoyancy, holding 20,000 souls suspended between sea and sky. Through the curved transparency of your eastern wall, the horizon begins its daily transformation from indigo to pearl, painting the cloud layer beneath you in shades that have no terrestrial names. You're on level 7 of the residential district, which means you're about 30 meters above the main platform surface, high enough to miss the heaviest spray during storm season, but low enough to still hear the ocean's constant whisper through open ventilation panels. Your room responds to your waking with the soft intelligence that defines life here. Panels brighten gradually along the ceiling, mimicking the sunrise schedule that the city's central algorithms calculate each morning based on latitude, season, and current weather patterns. The air circulation system increases flow by 2%, drawing in the salt-cleaned breeze that's been filtered through the atmospheric processors on the western edge of District 4. Temperature rises from the sleep-optimal 18 degrees Celsius to a more active 21. The change so gradual you barely notice except as a general sense of readiness spreading through your limbs. These aren't the brutal jolts of alarm clocks from another era. Here, waking is treated as a transition worth respecting, a gentle emergence from dreams into the structured consciousness required for operating complex systems that keep a city afloat. You rise and cross to the window, feet meeting the cork composite flooring that's grown from sustainable oak kelp, hybridized in the biological labs on level 12. Every surface in your quarters comes from the ocean or the sun, a closed-loop system where even your sheets are woven from fiber derived from recycled desalination membranes, surprisingly soft once processed through the textile facility. The view stops you, as it does every morning despite 3 years of residency. Below, the platform city stretches in hexagonal patterns, like a honeycomb designed by architects who understood that nature solved most engineering problems millennia before humans arrived. Each hexagon is approximately 200 meters across, linked to its neighbors by flexible gangways that account for independent motion while maintaining structural integrity. The outer hexagons hold the solar farms, their panels already tilting to catch the optimum angle of incoming light. Closer in, you can see the green towers of the vertical farms rising like silent prayers to photosynthesis, their LED arrays creating purple-pink halos in the gathering dawn. The Pacific spreads beneath everything, 4,000 meters deep at this position, far beyond the continental shelf where the city drifts in a carefully managed path that follows favorable currents. You can't see the water directly beneath you. The platform is too massive. But at the edges where the hexagons terminate, you catch glimpses of dark blue surface occasionally broken by whitecaps. Somewhere down there, the mooring cables descend not to anchor the city, that would be impossible at this depth, but to provide tension that helps stabilize against the strongest currents. They're more like guide wires than anchors, flexible enough to move with the city, but strong enough to prevent drift beyond operational parameters. The engineering team checks their tension daily, monitoring stress loads that would crush lesser materials, but that the carbon nanotube composites handle with room to spare. You move through your morning ablutions with the practiced efficiency of someone who's learned that water, even here surrounded by an ocean of it, remains precious. Your shower operates on a closed recirculation system, treating and filtering the same 8 liters through the entire cycle. It feels extravagant compared to early floating city prototypes that rationed residents to 3 liters, but conservation remains embedded in every action. The soap is biodegradable, synthesized from algae grown in the photobioreactors near the desalination plant, smelling faintly of coconut and performing better than most pre-transition products. You've stopped noticing the slight mineral taste in the drinking water, though visitors always comment on it. The desalination plants remove the salt but leave trace minerals that the health monitors determined are actually beneficial, a happy accident of incomplete filtration. Your clothing assembles itself from the smart closet, which has analyzed today's schedule synced from your personal device and determined you'll need semi-formal wear for the afternoon committee meeting, but should start with casual comfort for morning rounds in the hydroponics facility. The fabrics are light, designed for the constant mild temperatures that floating cities maintain. Their thermoregulation properties reducing the need for multiple layers. Everything is washable in gray water. The recycled shower water that gets a second life in the laundry systems before moving to agricultural use and finally being polished back to drinking standard. It's a cycle that would make desert civilizations weep with envy. 57 liters per person per day for all uses, compared to the 400 liters daily average of late-stage terrestrial suburbs. Breakfast beckons, but first you pause at the eastern window again, drawn by the light show developing below. The cloud layer that typically forms overnight at about 500 meters is breaking up as thermal currents begin their daily convection cycle. Gaps appear in the white expanse, revealing patches of ocean that flash silver when they catch the sun at correct angles. You can see the supply vessel that arrived during the night, a massive cargo drone programmed to make the crossing from the nearest terrestrial port every 3rd day, its hull already being unloaded by robotic systems at the southern docking hexagon. It brings the things the city can't yet produce for itself: rare earth elements for electronics, certain medications that require synthesis beyond local capabilities, and the carefully rationed luxuries that keep morale high: coffee beans, chocolate, spices from terrestrial farms that still outproduce their ocean-based counterparts in sheer variety if not efficiency. The morning chime sounds, a tone that resonates through the structure rather than blaring from speakers, reminding you that communal breakfast service started 3 minutes ago in the central plaza. You could eat in your quarters, many residents do, but there's something centering about beginning the day in the company of neighbors, sharing food grown meters away in facilities you helped design or maintain. You seal your apartment, the door recognizing your biometric signature and adjusting security protocols accordingly, then step into the corridor where soft bioluminescent strips guide your path toward the central elevator shaft. Other residents emerge from their quarters, a mixture of engineers, farmers, teachers, medical staff, maintenance specialists, and the dozen other roles required to keep a floating city operational. Everyone nods. Nobody's quite awake enough for conversation, and you file into the elevator that descends with barely a whisper of motors. The elevator shaft is transparent on its eastern side, giving you a continuous view of the city's layers as you descend from residential level 7 through the commercial districts on 5 and 6, past the administrative levels on 3 and 4, finally emerging at level 1, the main platform surface where most daily activities concentrate. The transition from the enclosed residential towers to the open plaza always strikes you as deliberate magic. The architects designed this reveal carefully, wanting residents to feel the city's scale each time they descend to ground level. You step out into a space that stretches 300 meters in any direction, hexagonal like everything else but filled with elements that make it feel organic rather than geometric. Trees grow here. Real trees. Not decorative but functional, their root systems helping filter water, while their canopy provides shade and produces oxygen in quantities that supplement the air processors. They're salt-tolerant species, carefully selected from coastal forests and adapted through gentle genetic encouragement to thrive in the high-humidity environment of a floating city. The communal dining area occupies the plaza's southern quarter, arranged in concentric circles around a central kitchen that operates with the efficiency of a spaceship galley and the warmth of a family kitchen. You grab a tray fabricated from pressed kelp fibers and join the queue moving past service stations, where today's offerings rotate on thermal displays. Breakfast here isn't about choice so much as optimization. The menu is determined by what the hydroponic farms produced yesterday, what the aquaculture tanks yielded, and what the nutrition algorithms determine the population needs based on aggregate health data and planned activities. It sounds dystopian until you taste it, then you realize this is what food could be when divorced from profit margins and marketing departments. Nutritious, fresh, and varied enough to stay interesting. You select a bowl of mixed greens, their leaves deep emerald and purple, varieties that would cost premium prices in terrestrial markets, but grow so efficiently in controlled environments that they're daily staples here. There's a protein portion. Today it's pan-seared barramundi from the aquaculture hexagon, its flesh flaking perfectly and seasoned with herbs grown in the windowsill gardens that most residents maintain. A side of what looks like rice but is actually a grain derived from salt-tolerant grasses, nutty and satisfying. Fresh fruit comes from the hydroponic orchards, dwarf citrus trees that produce year-round under optimized conditions. Your coffee, real coffee, a miracle of supply chain management, is poured from urns that hiss with residual heat. You add a splash of something the menu calls milk, but is actually a protein suspension created from algae processing, indistinguishable in taste from terrestrial dairy and requiring a fraction of the resources to produce. Seating is communal by design, long tables where residents sit mixed by district and profession. The theory being that cross-pollination of ideas happens in casual conversation more often than formal meetings. You find a spot beside Elena, who runs the desalination monitoring station, and across from Marcus, one of the structural engineers who spends his days analyzing stress patterns in the platform connections. They're deep in discussion about last night's weather system, a tropical disturbance that passed 80 kilometers to the south and produced swells large enough that the stabilization systems had to work overtime. You catch phrases like displacement compensation and harmonic damping, and understand enough to know that the city handled the weather precisely as designed, flexing rather than resisting, absorbing energy rather than fighting it. Conversation flows around the table, mixing technical discussion with gossip, schedule coordination with philosophical tangents. Someone mentions that the supply vessel brought a shipment of seeds for experimental crops, varieties adapted for even higher salinity tolerance that might allow expansion of growing areas into hexagons currently reserved for other uses. Another person notes that the school is planning a field trip to the ocean floor using the research submersible, and there's a brief debate about whether children that young should be exposed to the crushing darkness 4 kilometers down, a debate that surfaces every time the trip is proposed and always resolves in favor of education over protection. You contribute a comment about efficiency improvements in the hydroponic systems you manage, mention that yesterday's harvest exceeded projections by 11%, thanks to adjustments in the LED spectrum, and accept congratulations from table mates who understand that every efficiency gain means more food security, more resilience, more proof that this experiment in ocean living can sustain itself. The meal lasts 30 minutes, timed by the subtle dimming of the overhead lights that signal the transition from breakfast to morning work periods. You bus your tray to the cleaning station, where automated systems sort compostable materials for the biogas generators and wash dishes in scalding water heated by waste heat from the desalination plant. Nothing goes to waste here. The phrase is so common it's barely worth saying. But you notice it anyway in the small moments. The way even food scraps have value. How water circulates through 7 uses before returning to the ocean treated to standards cleaner than when it was drawn. You collect your personal device from the charging station where you left it, the battery topped off by the same solar grid that powers everything else, and check the morning schedule that updates itself based on citywide priorities and your assigned role. Today you're scheduled for 6 hours in the vertical farms, the hydroponic towers that form the agricultural heart of the city's food production. The work is part maintenance, part science, part meditation. You'll be checking nutrient levels in the circulation systems, pruning plants that are ready for harvest, starting new seedlings in the germination chambers, and monitoring the environmental controls that keep each growing zone at its optimal temperature and humidity. It's not farming in any traditional sense. There's no soil, no seasons, no gamble against weather or pests. But it requires attention and understanding, an ability to read the subtle signs that plants give when they're thriving or struggling, skills that translate across growing media, whether dirt or water. The walk to the agricultural district takes you along one of the main thoroughfares, a boulevard that stretches for half a kilometer across multiple hexagons, connected by the flexible gangways that account for independent platform motion. The walkway is wide enough for small electric vehicles, though most residents prefer walking or cycling. The distances within the city are manageable, and the views reward slower travel. On your right, the ocean spreads to the horizon, its surface textured with wind patterns and the occasional bird wheeling in search of fish. On your left, the city reveals its layered complexity: residential towers rising from platform bases, commercial districts humming with morning activity, the central spire of the administration building topped with weather sensors and communication arrays that keep the city connected to the wider world. You pass the education complex where children are already gathering for morning sessions, their voices carrying across the plaza in that particular frequency that means excitement barely contained by structure. The curriculum here is unlike terrestrial schools, heavy on environmental science, engineering, resource management, and the kind of practical knowledge needed to maintain life in an engineered ecosystem. Every student learns basic desalination theory, can calculate load distributions in hexagonal arrays, understands the photosynthetic pathways that keep the vertical farms productive, but they also study history, literature, art, and philosophy, subjects that keep them connected to the broader human narrative, even while living in what sometimes feels like a separate reality. Several students wave as you pass, recognizing you from the tours you occasionally give through the hydroponic facilities, and you wave back, conscious of being part of the web of connections that makes community possible. The vertical farm towers rise ahead, 8 structures arranged in a circle around a central processing facility, each tower reaching 30 stories above the main platform level. They're impressive from any angle, their exterior walls translucent in sections, where you can see the purple-pink glow of the LED growing lights cycling through their programmed spectrum. Up close, the hum of circulation pumps and ventilation systems creates a kind of mechanical heartbeat, steady and reassuring. You enter through the southern tower's ground floor access, passing through an airlock designed to maintain the carefully controlled internal atmosphere. Inside, the temperature drops several degrees. Humidity rises, and the light shifts to that otherworldly quality produced by the growth LEDs. The tower's interior is divided into vertical sections, each floor hosting a different crop at its optimal growing stage. The ground floor is germination, where seeds begin their journey in small containers of inert growing medium soaked with nutrient solution. The air here is warmest, encouraging sprouting, and the lighting is gentle, mimicking the dappled shade of forest understories where many food plants evolved. You check the automated systems first, scanning the monitoring screens that display temperature, humidity, pH levels, and nutrient concentrations for each germination tray. Everything is within parameters, as it usually is. The systems are designed for reliability, but human oversight remains part of the protocol. You've caught problems the sensors missed, subtle variations that fell within acceptable ranges, but presaged larger issues if left unaddressed. Satisfied with germination, you take the internal elevator to level 12, where tomato plants are currently in mid-growth, their vines climbing vertical supports in neat rows that maximize three-dimensional space. The LED panels here glow in a spectrum weighted toward red and blue wavelengths, the colors that chlorophyll absorbs most efficiently for photosynthesis. The effect is alien and beautiful. Rows of plants bathed in purple light, producing green leaves and red fruit in defiance of natural sunlight. You move between rows, checking for any signs of stress, looking at leaf color and texture, feeling the moisture content of the growing medium, examining the small fruits developing along the vines. Hydroponic growing eliminates many traditional problems. There are no soil-borne diseases, no weather catastrophes, no seasonal limitations, but plants are still living organisms capable of surprising you with unexpected needs or reactions. The tomatoes look excellent, their fruit swelling rapidly under the optimized conditions. You make a note that this section will be ready for harvest in approximately 5 days, earlier than scheduled, which means coordinating with the processing facility to ensure capacity for washing, sorting, and distribution. The efficiency of hydroponic production still amazes you even after years of managing these systems. These plants will produce 10 times the yield per square meter compared to traditional field farming, using 90% less water and growing year-round without regard for seasons. The controlled environment eliminates the need for pesticides, the closed nutrient loop minimizes waste, and the vertical arrangement means you can grow massive quantities of food in the footprint that would support a small terrestrial field. You spend the next 2 hours moving through different levels of the tower, checking lettuce on level 5, herbs on level 7, strawberries on level 15. Each crop has its own requirements, its own ideal spectrum and nutrient mixture and growth pattern. The lettuce grows in tight rows, its leaves spreading like green fans, ready for harvest every 3 weeks, in staggered batches that ensure continuous supply. The herbs, basil and cilantro and thyme release their aromatic oils in the humidity, creating a fragrance that transforms the growing space into something alive and generous. The strawberries are more delicate, requiring careful attention to prevent fungal issues in the high humidity, but their fruit is impossibly sweet, concentrated flavor that comes from perfect nutrition and no dilution from excess water. Between levels, you encounter other agricultural workers, colleagues who manage different towers or different crops, and you exchange information with the casual competence of specialists who trust each other's expertise. Someone mentions that the aquaponics system in Tower 6 is producing tilapia ready for harvest, which means coordinating the cleaning and processing schedule. Another person notes unusual readings in the nutrient circulation pump for Tower 3 and asks if you've seen similar patterns, leading to a brief technical discussion about pump efficiency and wear patterns. These conversations happen in stairwells and elevators, quick exchanges that keep the entire agricultural system synchronized without requiring formal meetings or written protocols. By late morning, you've completed your maintenance rounds and moved on to the more engaging work of system optimization. In the central processing facility that connects all 8 towers, you sit at a monitoring station that displays real-time data from thousands of sensors throughout the agricultural district. You can see nutrient levels, light intensity, CO2 concentrations, temperature gradients, and water flow rates for every growing section in every tower. The data streams in multicolored graphs and numerical readouts, painting a picture of agricultural activity as complex as any ecosystem, but far more observable. Your job is to identify patterns that suggest opportunities for improvement, places where adjusting one variable might increase yields or reduce resource consumption. You notice that Tower 4's lettuce section is consuming slightly more nutrients than equivalent sections in other towers while producing comparable yields, suggesting inefficiency somewhere in the system. You drill down into the data, comparing pH levels, checking for blockages in distribution lines, examining the age and condition of the growing medium. After 20 minutes of investigation, you identify the issue. The irrigation emitters in that section are calibrated slightly high, delivering more solution than the plants need and creating waste. You flag the issue for maintenance, who will recalibrate the emitters during tonight's low activity period. It's a small fix, but small fixes accumulated across the entire agricultural system add up to significant resource savings. The work absorbs you completely, the kind of deep focus where time becomes irrelevant, and you surface hours later, surprised to find that your stomach is suggesting lunch. The agricultural district maintains a small cafeteria for workers who don't want to trek back to the central plaza, and you grab a quick meal, fresh vegetables from the towers you just inspected, served raw with a light dressing made from algae-derived oils. You eat standing at a window that overlooks the ocean, watching the play of light on water, the occasional swell that passes beneath the city and sets off ripples in your drink. The distant supply vessel is departing now, its hull empty of cargo, heading back toward the terrestrial port where it will reload and begin the cycle again. After lunch, you shift to a different kind of work, educational rather than operational. Twice a week, you lead tours of the hydroponic facilities for various groups, sometimes students from the education complex, sometimes new residents still learning the city's systems, occasionally visitors from terrestrial communities considering their own floating city projects. Today's group is mixed, 8 people ranging from children barely tall enough to see into the growing trays to an elderly engineer whose questions reveal deep understanding of circulation physics. You guide them through Tower 2, explaining the basics of hydroponic cultivation while pointing out specific plants at various growth stages. The questions come in waves, each answer spawning 2 new questions in that fractal pattern that happens when people's curiosity engages with genuine complexity. How do the nutrients get into the water? Dissolved salts derived from mineral sources, carefully balanced to provide everything plants need. Why the purple lights? Because plants are most efficient at absorbing red and blue wavelengths, so we waste less energy than providing full-spectrum white light. What happens if the power goes out? Multiple redundant systems, battery backup, and emergency protocols that would keep essential circulation going for days. Do you ever lose plants to disease? Rarely. The controlled environment prevents most pathogens, though we remain vigilant for any signs of trouble. How much food does the city produce? Approximately 70% of our needs, with the remainder coming from the supply vessels and aquaculture operations. The tour concludes at the rooftop of Tower 2, where you've cultivated a small demonstration garden that grows in actual soil, heavy clay trucked in years ago during the city's construction phase. The plants here struggle compared to their hydroponic cousins. Smaller, slower growing, more vulnerable to pests that occasionally arrive despite quarantine protocols. But the soil garden serves an educational purpose, a direct comparison that shows why the city relies on soilless agriculture. Visitors invariably comment on how much better the hydroponic plants look, how much more productive the optimized systems are, and you see the moment when theory transforms into visceral understanding, when they truly grasp that traditional agriculture, for all its historical importance, might not be the best approach for feeding humanity's future. As the tour disperses and you return to the processing facility, you find yourself thinking about the broader context of your work here. The vertical farms aren't just about producing food for 20,000 residents. They're proof of concept for a larger vision, a test of whether humanity can develop self-sustaining communities that float independent of terrestrial agriculture. The implications reach beyond floating cities to space habitats, lunar colonies, anywhere that traditional farming is impossible, but life requires sustaining. The lessons learned here about nutrient ratios and lighting spectra and optimal growing densities will inform projects that haven't yet been imagined, and that weight of responsibility sits lightly on your shoulders as you monitor another day's successful harvest. The afternoon shifts your focus to the less glamorous but equally crucial water systems. After the agricultural work concludes at 3 o'clock, you transition to a scheduled shift at the desalination monitoring station, one of the rotating duties that most residents share, regardless of their primary specialization. The theory is that everyone should understand the critical systems that keep the city viable, and nothing is more critical than water. You can survive without fresh vegetables for weeks, but without fresh water, the city would evacuate within days. The desalination plants that convert ocean water into potable supply are therefore treated with the reverence usually reserved for sacred spaces, maintained with obsessive attention, and monitored constantly for any sign of degradation. The desalination complex occupies an entire hexagon on the city's western edge, strategically positioned where ocean currents provide the most efficient intake flow. The facility is massive, 3 stories of machinery humming with purposeful energy, banks of reverse osmosis membranes processing seawater through semi-permeable barriers that allow water molecules to pass while trapping salts and impurities. The process is elegantly simple in concept, but fiendishly complex in implementation, requiring precise pressure control, careful membrane maintenance, and constant monitoring of output quality. You arrive for your shift as the previous monitor, a structural engineer named Chen, finishes his notes on the hourly log. Chen briefs you quickly, pointing to graphs that track intake pressure, membrane differential, output flow rates, and the conductivity measurements that indicate salt removal efficiency. Everything is nominal, he reports, which is what you expected, but still feel grateful to hear. The systems are designed for reliability, multiple redundant pumps, backup power supplies, automatic failovers if any component shows signs of failure. But reliability comes from human attention as much as engineering. From people like you and Chen, who spend hours watching systems behave normally, so they'll notice immediately if something stops being normal. You settle into the monitoring station, a semicircular desk wrapped around 3 large screens displaying real-time data from the desalination plant. The left screen shows the intake systems, massive pipes that draw seawater from 30 meters below the surface, where the water is relatively free of biological material and suspended sediments. Prefiltration removes anything larger than 5 microns, a process that generates regular maintenance needs as filters clog with marine debris. The center screen displays the heart of the system, the reverse osmosis arrays, where seawater forced through semi-permeable membranes at high pressure yields fresh water on one side and concentrated brine on the other. The right screen tracks post-treatment, where the desalinated water receives remineralization to make it palatable and suitable for human consumption, plus ultraviolet sterilization to ensure no biological contaminants survive the process. The work is mostly watching, which sounds boring until you consider the stakes. The city requires approximately 1,200 cubic meters of fresh water daily for all uses: drinking, cooking, cleaning, agriculture, industrial processes. The desalination plant runs continuously, producing 50 cubic meters per hour, with output stored in massive tanks that provide several days of buffer capacity. Your job is to ensure that production continues without interruption, that output quality remains within specifications, and that you catch any developing problems before they become failures. You scan through the various data displays, checking that pressures match expected ranges, that membrane performance hasn't degraded, that the brine discharge is properly diluted before returning to the ocean. Around you, the machinery thrums with its constant rhythm, pumps cycling, valves opening and closing, water rushing through pipes and flows measured by the ton. The sound is mesmerizing after a while, industrial white noise that masks other thoughts and focuses your attention on the screens. You perform the standard checks, manually confirming 3 random water samples against the automated quality sensors, verifying that backup systems respond correctly to simulated failures, reviewing maintenance schedules to ensure nothing is overdue. Time stretches in the peculiar way it does during monitoring shifts, simultaneously crawling and racing, individual minutes feeling long while hours disappear. Your shift brings one minor event, an alert triggered by slightly elevated pressure in pre-filter section B. You investigate, pulling up detailed diagnostics, and determine that the filter is nearing end of life and should be changed during tonight's maintenance window. You note this in the log, flag it for the maintenance team, and watch the pressure stabilize as the system automatically shifts more flow to pre-filter section A. It's the kind of minor issue that happens regularly, designed into the system through redundancy, and handling it gives you a small surge of satisfaction, the feeling of having contributed to the city's continued operation. Between checks and logs, your mind wanders to the engineering marvel you're helping operate. Reverse osmosis desalination exists because someone figured out how to make membranes with pores approximately 1 nanometer in diameter, small enough to pass water molecules, but large enough that dissolved salt ions cannot fit through. The pressure required to force water through these tiny passages is substantial, around 60 bar for seawater, enough to crush softer materials but manageable with proper engineering. The energy cost is significant, roughly 4 kilowatt hours per cubic meter of fresh water produced, which is why the desalination plant is connected directly to the city's largest solar array and supplemented by wave energy converters that harvest power from the ocean's constant motion. The brine byproduct of desalination is carefully managed, diluted before discharge to prevent creating high salinity zones that could harm marine life. The concentrate exits through diffuser pipes that mix it rapidly with ocean water, ensuring that even at the discharge point, salinity is only slightly above ambient levels. The city monitors the surrounding ocean continuously for any signs of environmental impact, part of the covenant made when the floating city permits were approved. So far, the monitoring shows no detectable effects beyond the immediate vicinity of the platforms, and even there, marine life is adapting, using the underside of the hexagons as artificial reef habitat. Your shift ends at 6 as the sun begins its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the clouds below in shades of copper and gold. You complete the handoff to the evening monitor, a young woman named Yuki, who's relatively new to the city but learning quickly, her questions during the briefing demonstrating both attentiveness and developing intuition about the systems. You walk back toward the residential district as the city transitions to evening mode, lights beginning to glow in windows, the communal spaces filling with residents finished with their day's work. The temperature remains comfortable, the ocean thermal mass moderating any extremes, creating a perpetual spring that you've come to regard as normal, despite growing up in a place where seasons changed with dramatic intensity. Dinner is a communal affair in the central plaza, similar to breakfast, but more leisurely, the meal stretching longer as people linger over food and conversation. Tonight's menu features grilled fish from the aquaculture tanks, served with roasted vegetables and a grain pilaf that uses the salt-tolerant varieties you noticed at breakfast. You sit with a mixed group, sharing a table with people you know casually but not intimately, the kind of ambient social connection that floating city life encourages. Conversation roams across topics, someone discussing plans for expanding the residential districts to accommodate population growth, another person describing a school project where students are designing improvements to the water recovery systems, a debate about whether the city should invest in its own solar panel manufacturing capability rather than importing panels from terrestrial factories. The meal concludes as natural light fades and the city's extensive LED networks take over, transforming the plaza into a space that feels warm and inviting despite being entirely artificial. You dispose of your dinner waste, sorting compostable materials and recycling the dishes to the cleaning systems, then walk toward one of the city's recreational areas. Evening is when the city's social life truly activates, when people who've been focused on work and maintenance during the day shift into modes of relaxation and connection. You pass the entertainment complex where a film screening is about to start, the library where study groups gather around tables, the gymnasium where an enthusiastic game of indoor soccer is underway, balls bouncing off walls with a rhythm that echoes across the plaza. You're drawn instead toward the ocean observation deck, a hexagonal platform that extends beyond the main city structure and sits at water level, waves occasionally sloshing across its surface during high swells. The deck is accessible via a ramp that descends from the main platform level, and as you walk down, the perspective shifts from aerial overview to intimate proximity with the sea. Several other residents are already on the deck, standing at the safety railing and watching the water move in its ancient patterns, illuminated by underwater lights that turn the waves translucent green and blue. The ocean here feels different from viewing it from the residential towers. Up high, it's an abstraction, a textured surface extending to horizon. Down here, at water level, it becomes immediate and powerful, something alive and indifferent to human presence. The swells rise and fall with the slow breathing of something too large to comprehend, occasionally cresting into whitecaps when wind shear overcomes surface tension. The smell is intense, salt and brine, and the complex chemistry of dissolved organics, the scent of life concentrated in liquid form. Spray catches you occasionally when waves hit the deck's edge, fine mist that leaves salt crystals drying on your skin and clothes. You stand at the railing for perhaps 20 minutes, watching the ocean and the sky perform their nightly transformation. Stars emerge as the last light fades, visible here in quantities impossible in the terrestrial cities where you once lived. No light pollution except the city's own carefully shielded illumination. The Southern Cross hangs low on the horizon, confirmation of your position in the Pacific's middle latitudes. Above, the Milky Way arcs from east to west, our galaxy's edge-on view rendered visible by the darkness surrounding a floating city far from any continent. You identify constellations more from memory than sight, their patterns familiar, but somehow different when viewed from a platform that moves with ocean currents rather than staying fixed to terrestrial coordinates. Another resident joins you at the railing, a maintenance technician named Isaiah, who you've worked with occasionally on system upgrades. You exchange nods of recognition, but no words, content to share the space in comfortable silence. Eventually Isaiah speaks, voice quiet enough to not disturb the moment. Never gets old, does it? This view. No, you agree, because it doesn't. 3 years of residence, and you still find yourself drawn to the ocean observation deck several times a week, pulled by something older than rational thought, some deep recognition that this, being suspended between sea and sky, is where humans always belonged, even when we spent millennia pretending otherwise. You watch another swell pass beneath the deck, feel the platform rise and fall with the water's rhythm, and understand once again why you left solid ground for this precarious floating existence. The conversation with Isaiah drifts toward work topics, speculation about planned expansions to the city's infrastructure, discussion of new technologies being tested that might improve efficiency or reduce dependence on terrestrial supply chains. The city is always evolving, always improving. Its design philosophy embracing change as essential rather than optional. The modular hexagonal structure allows for easy additions, new platforms connected to the existing array with flexible gangways that account for independent motion. Current plans involve adding 3 residential hexagons, 2 additional agricultural towers, and an entire hexagon devoted to advanced manufacturing capabilities that would reduce the cargo manifest on those bi-weekly supply vessels. Isaiah mentions hearing rumors that another floating city is being constructed in the Indian Ocean, designed on similar principles, but with improvements learned from studying Cascade Station's 3 years of operation. The news creates mixed feelings: pride that your city serves as proof of concept and template, concern that competition for resources and expertise might develop, hope that the floating city movement is reaching critical mass, where it becomes inevitable rather than experimental. The conversation circles these themes without reaching conclusions, because conclusions aren't the point. The thinking and discussion are what matter, the collective processing that happens when communities face uncertain futures. You part ways with Isaiah as full darkness settles and return to the main plaza, which has transformed into evening mode with subtle lighting that creates gathering spaces and dark respites in careful balance. A small concert is underway in the southern section, acoustic musicians playing instruments derived from traditional designs, but crafted from materials available to the floating city. Guitars with bodies resonating with peculiar timbre from compressed kelp composites, drums skinned with synthesized membranes, wind instruments carved from bamboo grown in the agricultural district's experimental sections. The music drifts across the plaza, not amplified but somehow carrying, filling spaces between conversations and laughter with gentle melody. You find a seat on one of the benches arranged in concentric circles around the musicians and settle in to listen. Around you, other residents do the same, some swaying slightly to the rhythm, others still as stone with eyes closed in concentration. The music here serves multiple purposes beyond entertainment. It's therapy and community building and cultural preservation, all woven into sound. The musicians cycle through various styles, sometimes traditional folk songs from the diverse cultures represented in the city's population, sometimes original compositions that try to capture the floating city experience in sound, the constant motion of waves, the bright intensity of hydroponics lighting, the mechanical breathing of desalination plants. The concert lasts an hour, concluding with a piece written specifically for this city, a complex arrangement that somehow translates the hum and thrum of floating city infrastructure into melody. As the final notes fade, the audience responds with applause that echoes off the surrounding structures, appreciation that feels genuine rather than obligatory. The musicians bow, accept the recognition, then begin packing their instruments with the casual efficiency of people who've performed together many times. The crowd disperses gradually, no rush because there's nowhere that requires rushing to. Schedules on a floating city are suggestions rather than commandments outside the critical systems that require constant monitoring. You meander toward the residential district, taking a circuitous route that passes through the market area where evening trade is winding down. The market operates as much for social interaction as commerce, vendors selling handcrafted items made from city resources, jewelry carved from shells collected during diving excursions, clothing sewn from the textile products of the manufacturing facility, art that captures the particular aesthetic of floating city life. You pause at several stalls, examining offerings more from curiosity than intent to purchase, engaging in the brief conversations that vendors use to build connection with their community of customers. One stall catches your attention with a display of bioluminescent containers, glass vessels that hold cultures of photophosphorescent algae collected from deep ocean waters and adapted to survive at surface pressures. The algae glow with eerie blue-green light when disturbed, creating living lamps that require no power beyond occasional feeding with nutrient drops. The vendor, an elderly woman named Grace, who you've seen around the city but never formally met, explains the cultivation process, her enthusiasm for the subject transforming a sales pitch into genuine education. You purchase one container, partly because the bioluminescence will provide gentle nighttime illumination in your quarters, mostly because Grace's passion deserves supporting. The walk home takes you past the education complex, where evening classes are in session, adult education offerings that range from advanced engineering topics to creative writing workshops. You glimpse one classroom through open windows where a philosophy discussion is animated enough to involve hand gestures and raised voices, the good kind of argument where everyone's invested in reaching truth rather than winning points. Another classroom shows a hands-on workshop teaching basic electrical repair, residents learning skills that increase the city's collective competence and reduce dependence on specialized technicians for minor fixes. Your residential tower looms ahead, its windows creating a checkerboard pattern of light and dark as residents retire to their quarters or remain out in the plaza. You take the elevator to level 7, watching the city diminish through the transparent wall as you ascend. The plaza lights creating pools of illumination against the surrounding darkness. The elevator delivers you to your corridor, where several neighbors are visible through open doorways, the kind of casual porosity that happens when people trust their community and desire connection more than privacy. Inside your quarters, you set the bioluminescent container on a shelf where it can serve as gentle nightlight, watching the algae swirl and glow as they adjust to the disturbance of transport. The room feels familiar after 3 years, your possessions arranged in ways that make sense to you, personal touches that transform standardized architecture into home. You shower in your allotted water, change into sleeping clothes, perform the small rituals that signal to your body that the day is ending. Through the eastern window, you can see stars reflected in the ocean's surface, doubling the night sky into water and void equally dense with ancient light. Before sleep, you spend a few minutes reviewing tomorrow's schedule on your personal device. Morning shift in the vertical farms again, followed by an afternoon committee meeting about proposed changes to the agricultural district's expansion plans. Evening duty monitoring the city's structural integrity sensors, a rotating responsibility that everyone shares to maintain collective awareness of the platform's condition. It's a full schedule, but not overwhelming. The city's planners learned early that productivity requires balance, that pushing residents too hard generates burnout that undermines the careful community cohesion required for isolated living. You set the device aside and lie in your bed that floats in a room that floats in a city that floats. Layers of suspension that you've stopped noticing except in moments like this, when consciousness hovers between waking and sleep. The ocean whispers through ventilation panels. The platform makes its barely audible adjustments to current and wind. The city breathes its mechanical and organic breath around you. Tomorrow will be similar to today, which was similar to yesterday. The kind of routine that terrestrial critics call monotonous, but which you've learned to recognize as stability, the foundation required for a community to build meaning and purpose. The future of floating cities remains uncertain, despite 3 years of successful operation. Critics point to costs, both financial and environmental, questioning whether the resources invested in keeping 20,000 people comfortable on a floating platform might serve more people if allocated to terrestrial communities. Proponents counter that floating cities represent crucial research and development for humanity's longer-term survival, testing technologies and social structures that will be essential if climate change continues, displacing coastal populations, or if humans expand into space habitats, where every resource must be generated and recycled. The debates continue in academic journals and policy forums, but here, suspended above 4,000 meters of Pacific Ocean, the abstractions translate into daily life, into vegetables growing under purple lights, and fresh water flowing from desalination membranes, and communities gathering in plazas to make music and share meals. You drift towards sleep thinking about the children you saw earlier, students learning to calculate load distributions and understand photosynthetic pathways, growing up in an environment where independence from terrestrial systems is normal rather than experimental. They will be the generation that determines whether floating cities remain curiosities or become common, whether the technologies and social structures being tested here propagate to dozens or hundreds of similar communities or fade as expensive demonstrations that never achieved scale. The outcome depends partly on factors beyond any individual's control, economic trends, and political will and technological developments. But it also depends on days like today, on the accumulated success of thousands of unremarkable shifts monitoring water quality and maintaining hydroponic systems, and keeping communities functioning through small acts of competence and care. Sleep arrives like a wave, gentle and inevitable, carrying you down into darkness where dreams mix memory with speculation, where floating cities multiply across your unconscious ocean until the entire planet is webbed with them, humanity finally accepting that solid ground was always optional, that the sea could hold us if we learned to float with intention rather than resist with mass. The platform rocks slightly as a larger swell passes beneath, motion that you don't notice consciously, but which your sleeping body adjusts to automatically, the adaptation that 3 years of residence has embedded into muscle memory. The bioluminescent algae glow softly on their shelf, pulsing with their own rhythms, living light that asks nothing and gives illumination freely. Outside your window, the city continues its night operations, essential systems maintained by people working shifts while others sleep, the constant vigilance required to keep complex infrastructure functioning. The desalination plant processes its steady 50 cubic meters per hour. The vertical farms cycle through their programmed light sequences, optimizing photosynthesis across thousands of plants. The solar panels wait in darkness for dawn's return, positioned already for optimal angle when light arrives. The structural monitors watch for stress patterns in the hexagonal connections, alert for any sign that waves are exceeding design parameters. The waste treatment plant processes the day's organic materials into biogas that supplements the city's energy supply. The communication arrays maintain contact with terrestrial networks, receiving weather data, and sending performance metrics that justify continued support from the consortium that funded the city's construction. The Night Watch personnel move through their routines with the practiced efficiency of people who've made peace with nocturnal schedules, checking systems, logging data, making minor adjustments that keep everything operating within optimal ranges. They know that tomorrow's day shift will inherit systems running smoothly because tonight's crew maintained vigilance through the hours when most residents sleep. It's unglamorous work, often lonely, but essential in ways that become obvious only during the rare occasions when Night Watch misses something and day shift encounters problems that could have been prevented. The city operates on trust, each person depending on others to execute their roles with competence and attention, a mutual dependence that creates both vulnerability and strength. The ocean moves beneath everything, its surface patterns changing constantly, while its depths remain stable, cold and dark, and under pressure that would crush human bodies. 4 kilometers below your sleeping form, the seafloor stretches in plains and ridges that map tectonic forces operating on geological timescales. The mooring cables descend into that darkness, their tension precisely calibrated to help stabilize the city without anchoring it rigidly, allowing drift within specified bounds while preventing the currents from carrying the platform too far from its optimal position. Fish move through the cable's shadows, attracted by the small ecosystems developing on their surfaces. Barnacles and algae colonizing the synthetic materials and creating habitat where none existed before. Above, the stars wheel through their nightly rotation, constellations shifting position as Earth spins beneath them. The same sky that guided navigators for millennia, now watched by residents of a floating city who rarely need navigation. The city's position monitored by satellite systems and maintained by automated corrections to the steering vanes that provide limited directional control. The clouds that formed during the day have dissipated, leaving the sky clear except for the occasional high-altitude ice crystal formation that catches starlight and glitters like dust scattered across black glass. The temperature drops several degrees, ocean thermal mass moderating the change but not eliminating it entirely, and the city's environmental controls adjust heating output minutely to compensate, maintaining comfortable temperatures in the residential spaces where 20,000 people sleep in beds that float in rooms that float in a city that floats. Hours pass in the peculiar way they do during deep sleep, simultaneously eternal and instantaneous, your consciousness having retreated to wherever minds go when bodies rest. The bioluminescent algae gradually dim as they settle into their own night cycle, their glow fading to barely perceptible whisper of light. The city's nighttime illumination creates a soft halo visible from space, a small point of light on the dark ocean, marking human presence in an environment that feels simultaneously welcoming and alien. Satellites passing overhead capture images that show the hexagonal pattern, the geometric precision of the platform arrangement, proof that intelligence has imposed order on chaos, that engineering can create islands where nature provided only waves. The pre-dawn hours bring subtle changes, a gradual brightening of the eastern sky that begins long before the sun itself appears, atmospheric scattering painting the horizon in shades that transition from black through purple to pale blue. The city's environmental systems detect the approaching dawn and begin their own transition, gradually increasing illumination in common spaces, adjusting temperature to reflect anticipated activity levels, sending gentle wake signals to personal devices that will wake residents on schedules they've customized. The Night Watch prepares for a shift change, completing final checks and preparing handoff briefings for the day shift personnel who will arrive shortly after dawn. You stir in your bed as morning approaches, not yet awake but no longer deeply asleep, hovering in that liminal space where dreams become memories and the day's first thoughts begin forming. Through the window, the sky continues its transformation, the eastern horizon now distinctly lighter, promising sunrise within the next 20 minutes. The city's morning rhythm builds gradually, people emerging from quarters, elevators beginning their cycles, the central plaza accepting the first residents, drawn by the promise of breakfast and community. Another day begins on the floating city, similar to yesterday, similar to tomorrow. Each one a small proof that humans can adapt to any environment if given sufficient motivation and appropriate technology. The sunrise, when it comes, paints the clouds below in shades of gold and coral, creating a spectacle that you're awake to witness through partially opened eyes. Light spills through your window, warm and generous, carrying the promise of energy that will power the city's systems through another cycle. The solar panels begin their day's work, converting photons to electrons with silent efficiency, feeding power to batteries and distribution networks that will support everything from desalination to LED lighting to the entertainment systems in the plaza. The vertical farms receive the dawn as well, though their LED arrays make them independent of natural light cycles. Growing continues regardless of sun or moon, a liberation from celestial rhythms that represents both triumph and loss. You rise as you did yesterday, will rise tomorrow, caught in the gentle repetition that defines life in any community, floating or terrestrial, ancient or modern. The day unfolds before you with its scheduled tasks and unexpected moments, its small satisfactions and minor challenges. It's opportunities to contribute to the collective enterprise of keeping 20,000 people alive and comfortable and reasonably happy on a platform suspended above the ocean's vastness. It's a life that would seem strange to your ancestors, who assumed solid ground was humanity's permanent address, but which feels increasingly normal to you and the other residents who've made this choice, who've traded terrestrial stability for oceanic motion, who've bet their days on the proposition that humans can thrive anywhere if given sufficient ingenuity and determination. Hey everyone, that's where we'll leave our journey today. A single rotation through 24 hours aboard a floating city that doesn't yet exist but might, someday soon, become as common as the skyscrapers that once seemed impossible. If you enjoyed this exploration of what life might look like when we take to the seas, not as visitors but as residents, go ahead and leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want more of these journeys through time and possibility, more visits to moments and places that help us understand where we've been and where we might be going. And drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're watching from. Whether you're in Lagos at lunch or London past midnight, joining me in imagining futures that hover just beyond the horizon of what we currently consider possible. Until next time, keep dreaming about the places humanity might go, and remember that every impossible future begins as someone's ridiculous idea. Sweet dreams, travelers. May your sleep be gentle and your mornings full of light, whether you wake on solid ground or floating free above the waves.